Welcome to the November edition of What's in Bloom at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. Each month we put together a selection of plants that are in bloom in that particular month, and we make a sheet of those that we hand out to our garden visitors. And normally when we do our What's in Bloom, we run through that entire list. But this month we're going to try doing that a little differently. So we're going to just pick a selection of certain plants on that list and talk about them in a little bit more detail. So let's have a look. What's in bloom November at the Ruth Bancroft Garden. Here we have an aloe from East Africa, Aloe cheranganiensis. It comes from Kenya, and the name refers to the Cherangani Plateau or Cherangani Hills where it grows in Kenya. And it's a member of a large group of aloes from East Africa that have a shrubby growth habit, and there are others in that group that are better known, like Aloe elganica and Aloe dowii. This one, Aloe cheranganiensis, is not so common in cultivation, but here it is just coming into bloom. We're not quite to the 1st of November yet, and the buds aren't quite open, but this will be open for most of the month of November. It has a little bit of spotting on the leaves, but more when it's young and not so much when it's older. So these older rosettes now have lost their spots. But it has a branch inflorescence and bright red orange flowers, a wonderful aloe. Its cold tolerance is a little marginal, and so we have it growing here underneath the shade of a tree where the overhead canopy helps to protect it during cold weather. Aloe cheranganiensis.
This is Banksia ashbyi. Banksia is a genus endemic to Australia, which is part of the Protea family. This particular Banksia is part of the classic original Banksia group before the introduction of the Dryandras into the genus Banksia. So it has sort of the classic long, deeply serrated leaves that we come to expect with Banksias. This particular species is somewhere in between being a big shrub and a small tree in its conditions here in the garden, competing with a very thirsty eucalyptus. It's been kept very small with that resource competition, but that's okay for us. If it were out in the open, getting a little bit more water, you could expect this to be as much as a 12-foot, 15-foot shrub, so quite large. You can see the glorious flower heads, getting about ready to open up there in the front, and then the next one on the way back here, and then our old flower heads. It's usually best practice with most everything in the genus Protea to prune off the flowers as soon as they start to age out to keep the plants as compact as possible. But with Banksia, we often like to leave the old flower heads on there where we can so we can see a little bit of the seed action. The seeds on Banksias form almost like alien parasitic clams on the old spent flower. They look very otherworldly and bizarre. And anytime we can highlight some charming feature of the plant, we like to do so. So we leave some of them on there. This is a fabulous one for Bay Area gardens. It's from that western part of Australia that's truly Mediterranean in climate, and it's really well lined up to our cultivational needs. And while many of these things in the Protea family can really be heartbreakers in the landscape, they start performing for you for a while. You start to love them, and then they turn brown precipitously for one reason or another. This has been one that has done. We planted 2 plants in the Bancroft Garden almost 10 years ago, and we still have 2 plants alive, which is really good for us here in this harsh place. And it's been one that's performed really, really well in a lot of gardens locally. So we actually have this one in the nursery if you want to come down and check it out. Banksia ashbyi.
This little aloe here is Aloe ellenbeckii. It used to be known as Aloe dumatorum, and then the name was switched to Aloe ellenbeckii because that name has priority. And it's an aloe that comes from northeastern Africa, near the border between Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. Now, that's not a wonderful place to travel. I'm not recommending you go to see this aloe in habitat because that is an area where you're likely to get abducted if you go there. But that's where this comes from, and it belongs to a large group of aloes known as the maculate aloes. Now, maculate means spotted, and lots of aloes have spots, but this is a particular group of spotted aloes that have a swollen base to the flower, like this one has. This group is very prominent in South Africa, where there's many species in this group, but this is one of the ones from much farther north, up in northeastern Africa. And it has very narrow leaves, more almost cylindrical leaves as compared to the other maculate aloes, and it is a heavily clustering plant, so it makes a bigger and bigger clump, but it never gets any kind of a stem at all. And it's a little bit frost tender, and so we have it here in a bed that gets covered in the winter. It's just about to come into flower now as we do the filming. I think it's maybe a day or two away from the first flower opening, but the buds are red-orange with a green tip, and it has sometimes a single inflorescence like this one down here, and sometimes with a branch like this, but it never has very many branches. Aloe ellenbeckii.
This is Euphorbia clandestina, which is a columnar semi-cactiform euphorbia from the southern Cape in South Africa, the area immediately to the east of Cape Town, so a climate that's quite similar to ours. And this is a plant that seems to do very well in California gardens, at least coastally adjacent ones to some degree or another. It has a very unusual tuberculate, pointy tubercle having stem that often has a little bit of interesting purple patterning on it. It's in a group of plants that many of which look similar, Euphorbia clava, and then there are some other sort of pseudo-cactiform, winter-growing sort of columnar euphorbias from the area as well. But this one stands out in terms of being a real easy plant to grow in gardens. This is a vigorous plant. It's less prone to rot than a lot of the similar looking ones, and at least with a short duration, this plant can tolerate below 25 degrees Fahrenheit, which not that many euphorbias that look like this really reliably can. So, we like that. We're a little bit confused about what the specific epithet clandestina means. That means, clandestine or hidden. And perhaps it's that the cyathea are hidden down underneath these almost aeonium rosette-looking bracts on the stem there. You can see where it flowered the year before, but we're just going to leave that one as a mystery. What I'll say about it in the garden is that over time it does often end up getting a little bit floppy and need to be staked. So we can either behead it when it gets a little bit tired, or we can stake it up, or we can just let it trail down to the ground and squirm around. Euphorbia clandestina.
Here we have a hybrid aloe, Aloe zubb x elegans. I like to make aloe hybrids, and I've made quite a number with Aloe zubb, which used to be known as Aloe cinctana. It's an aloe that comes from Sudan, so up at the northern end of the range of aloe. It's a compact aloe with leaves that flush a little bit lavender and with red teeth, and has clusters of yellow flowers. And so I like yellow flowers, and it's also a easy to grow, tough plant. So I've used it in lots of hybrids. In this case, I've crossed it with Aloe elegans, which comes from Ethiopia. And I can see here that the inflorescence has lots of branches, each one ending in a nice tight cluster of yellow-orange flowers. Really a wonderful fall blooming aloe. Aloe zubb x elegans.
Here we have Echeveria gibbiflora, which is one of the large-leaved species that's widely distributed in southern Mexico. The form you're looking at here is from central Oaxaca, and we grew it from seed. And you can see that in that the three individuals that we have going on here are all a little bit different. This one errs towards the pink and ruffly end of the spectrum, but these things can be blue, they can be purple, they can have bumps on the leaves, they can have ruffles at the edges, or be less ruffly, like we can see with the one in the back. These are highly variable. These are the source of all the psychedelic cabbage-looking Echeveria hybrids that you're probably familiar with in cultivation, all derived from Echeveria gibbiflora. A very, very, very attractive plant in landscapes. Not a fully frost-hardy plant for us in an inland valley here, so one that we need to sneak into some somewhat protected places. If you live in a coastal adjacent place where you're more frost-free, right next to the ocean, then this is one that you can grow outside without any worry whatsoever. Cultivational note with these big, tall ultimately tall growing Echeverias, these things will grow a stem, and the way you decide when it is time to behead them, whack their heads off, and start over with new roots is when you see that stem starting to constrict and get smaller. It was big and fat and doing a good job of wicking nutrients up from the root, and then it starts to shrivel up, and then it's time to lop their heads off and start over again. So Echeveria gibbiflora, a big, dramatic, ruffly rosette for the garden.
That brings us to the close of our November edition of What's in Bloom at the Ruth Bancroft Garden, highlighting some of the wonderful species to be found here at the garden. And we encourage you to come here and see them for yourself if you're in the area and are able to come and visit us. And you could stop in our nursery and look for some of the wonderful plants that we grow here in our nursery. If you are not in the area, we have lots of things on our website, our Instagram photos and our Tumblr photos and our plant highlights and so on. So check out our website, the Ruth Bancroft Garden.